Welcome back. If you're wondering what President Trump means when he says Iran must declare an unconditional surrender, it means the bombings will continue until Iran cries uncle.
It's where they cry uncle, or when they can't fight any longer and there's nobody around to cry uncle. That could happen too, because we've wiped out their leadership numerous times already. So it's if they surrender, or if there is nobody around to surrender, but they're rendered useless in terms of military.
Here with us now, retired Lieutenant General Dennis Krall. He is the former Director of Command, Control, Communications, and Cyber for the Joint Staff. So, General, when is Iran going to cry uncle?
Yeah, I guess we're going to find out. But I know that the administration has been very clear about turning up the pain, and we're seeing it play out in front of us now.
It doesn't seem like, based on the videos and the reports that we're getting, that this is World War III. But is it safe to say that it is AI War I?
Well, I think it's AI enabled. I still believe we're in the very nascent phases of seeing AI play out in everything from supply chains to targeting, just to, logistics and the like. There are early adopters, both in our country and also with our coalition partners. But I think we're on the front end of that.
And the Wall Street Journal has a really interesting item about Pete Hegseth's effort to have an AI-first warfighting force. It says, part of it, AI tools are helping gather intelligence, pick targets, plan bombing missions, and assess battle damage at speeds not previously possible. AI helps commanders manage supplies of everything from ammunition to spare parts and lets them choose the best weapon for each objective. Do other countries have that kind of a capability, other militaries?
Not across in scale, right? There might be episodic parts and pieces where we can see things that work and things that don't. But look, I think it's a very wise statement to make about increasing the use. We're in the perfect storm right now. We're awash in data, all different types. We record and keep everything. But the challenge is the human's ability to go through that, especially in a time of relevance. The speed of relevance is really the big challenge we have. We went in wars of past of having months, weeks, days, into the hypersonic age now, where decisions have to be made in milliseconds.
And it seems like in Washington, a concern that doesn't really get enough coverage is that these AI systems, once they are introduced into a military system, they could just take over. And suddenly people are not involved anymore. Is there a risk of that?
I think there's always a risk of that unless safeguards are put in place. And there are ways to put safeguards in place to make sure that those outcomes do not happen.
And you just set up this soundbite perfectly. It's going to seem like a big setup, but it's not. Lawmakers are struggling with these safeguards. They don't know how to make a law to use AI in a safe way. This just happened on Capitol Hill. We don't have it, but I can tell you, Senator Mark Kelly was talking to Major General Stephen Marks. Kelly said, at the moment, a drone identifies and confirms a target. Whether or not a human has to make the final decision, he wants to know if systems are basically picking targets now and then taking them out. Is that something that you worry about?
I don't know that I worry about it. I think again, it's been out for quite some time. If you think about some of these near proximity systems that protect ships, there are parameters that are put in place to ensure there are left and right lateral limits on those engagements. And a lot of safeguards go into that. But if a human was in the loop in every single engagement, think about the decision time you would have to intercept a hypersonic missile 10 feet above the waterline heading toward a ship. It's just not practical. So it's also not new. We have several weapon systems that have some level of autonomy, but only after those gates and safeguards are employed by people, and responsible people at that.
So AI can just do stuff faster than somebody. We saw that movie, the Netflix movie, the name is escaping me, but a bomb is coming for the United States. A missile is coming from the United States, a nuke. And they're all trying to figure out here what to do about it, how to get it. You're saying that an AI system would be better at that.
Absolutely, but it's not just about speed. Speed is the coin of the realm now, but it's also about unveiling things that are unintuitive. We see it in AI's use in medicine, for example, where doctors studying something only get what they get in their lifetime and experience. but an AI application or agent can look at everything and ingest everything and come up with outcomes that we would have never have seen ourselves.
Because the U.S. is so good with the AI, does that mean that people watching can be less worried about something like weapon stockpiles going down a little bit? We know President Trump just had these defense contractors. They say the supplies are good for now, but they're using a lot of bombs. Lockheed's going to quadruple production. Should we be less worried about running out of bombs and missiles if AI means that every bomb and missile is going to be doing exactly what it's supposed to do?
Well, not necessarily, because I take a look at, we have to be careful about what lessons we learn from each conflict. It doesn't mean the next conflict is going to follow suit, even what's happening today. I mean, to be fair, there's no country in the world that can do what's happening right now. It's unfolding before our eyes. But even so, we might be faced with a near-peer threat in the future that takes away that electromagnetic spectrum and the freedom for us to employ those weapon systems. We even have critical bases and stations in the country that can be impacted by cyber attacks. And that's what we use to project power forward. So I don't know that I would be worried, but I certainly would be prioritizing the stockpile and also exercising and training the capabilities for us to operate in what might be our worst day.
And as you survey all that we know about Epic Fury so far, what do you think that the Joint Chiefs and the Pentagon, you've been in the room with these guys as they survey damage reports, damage assessments. What do you think they have looked at and said, we actually need to do this better?
Well, I'd like to flip the question a bit. I'll tell you what I think that they are doing at unprecedented levels, the intelligence, the accuracy that they've been able to achieve. It's just unmatched. And I would imagine, you know, there's always room for improvement in everything that we do, but it's kind of hard from what I've been able to see so far on areas that might enter into that. These are probably, you know, adjustments on the margins at best.
Fascinating conversation. This is a part of the Pentagon's playbook that nobody in the world has seen. Friends or foes, we're all seeing it play out really now on social media, this stuff that's been classified for so long. General, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Be sure to like and subscribe for all the Fox News latest on YouTube and catch full shows streaming now on Fox One.